All right, good morning. So I was talking to a friend of mine this morning, and I said, yeah, I have to give a presentation up in Manitoba. And he goes, yeah, how long's your presentation? And I said, an hour and a half. And he goes, wow. And I said, yeah, I know, it's not nearly enough time. We got lots of stuff to talk about today, so we're going to get right into it. I've got a handout for you, because I'm a big believer in, if you're going to come to any of our presentations, you're going to ever listen to us, we want you to go home with something. So hopefully you enjoy what we're going to talk about today. I want to start you here, though. I don't have this in the presentation. So my brother Darren, that's him way over on the right side. I am the goofy-looking guy right there. But that was my family growing up. By the way, my sister Janelle now produces our radio show there. But anyway, we farm about 3,500 crop acres near Sioux Falls, South Dakota. It's kind of fun where we get to farm because we have really variable soils. Most farmers would hate variable soils. I love it because for testing purposes, it's fantastic. We also do a lot of testing, multi-state in the United States, through our Hefty seed company and Ag PhD research team. So as far as this Ag PhD, just out of curiosity, how many of you have seen us on TV or listened to us on the radio for Ag PhD? All right, awesome. If you haven't, here's a little information about the media things that we do. So just so you know, I grew up on the farm, went to college for ag, never expected we were going to be doing a TV or radio show someday, but we talk about farming and crops every day. So TV, radio, you can stream our show now on Acres TV. We're on a whole bunch of different things. We don't cover the weather, the grain markets, or the farm news. That's what pretty much everybody else does. We talk about agronomic issues that you can control every day. So our topics today, pushing the limits, how to grow more bushels per acre. We're going to talk just a little about weed, insect, and disease control. We're going to talk about fertility. I want to spend some time on that. But I want to start you with this, and drainage. Okay, so a couple of quick things. We're in a dry area, all right? We farm in a dry area too in South Dakota. My dad grew up in Iowa, where they had way more rain, way better soils, everything else. Well, even for us, where we're in a drier area, drainage absolutely really helps. We're going to talk about this a little bit today. Drain tile isn't that expensive if you look at it in the long term. Short term, yes, it costs some money. And here's another question I quite often get from Manitoba farmers. Can't I just improve drainage by building calcium levels or organic matter, reduce compaction, whatever? Do I really need drain tile? In many cases, you do. I talk passionately about drain tile because I'll just tell you this. We started tiling on our farm about 20 years ago, and it has literally transformed our farm. Our soils are so much healthier. Our land is so much better. It's awesome. It's fun. So we're going to talk about drain tile to start the day here. So just to begin with, because a lot of people misunderstand tile. The first thing is, all tile does is it lowers the water table. So for example, if I set a tile line in the ground, unless my water table is above that level, that tile is not going to run. Okay? If the water table is down, because a lot of people get worried, oh, I don't want to put tile in the ground. Some years I have drought. Well, guess what? Your tile's not going to run because the water table is below the level of the tile line. Here's the thing that I want you to think about, though. Let's say that you have untiled ground and it's 100% saturated. Okay? Well, then when it rains, where does that rain have to go? It can't soak in anymore because your ground's 100% saturated. Now it has to run off, and when it does, it's going to carry soil, chemical, and fertilizer with it, all things you don't want to lose, and all things that the people downstream don't want. So here is the first tile plow we had on our farm. There we're laying out some tile. There we're plowing it in the ground. This, quite frankly, is the easy part. It's all these other things we talk about, and that's really what I wanted to focus on here today because there's so many misconceptions. So if you're like me and you slept through the first day of soils class in college, you may have missed this. But ideal soil composition is 50% dirt, 25% water, and 25% air. The problem when you have too much water is now you don't have the air. When you have too much water, it kills soil microbes, it stunts roots and plant growth. It leads to significantly lower yields. Plants will not grow into a water table. Also, over time, if drainage is poor, there's going to be little plant growth to suck up that water, and that means that the excess water issue becomes even worse. And then you end up with stuff like this, or this, or this, or this one. Now, I don't know, maybe it's just the color of the equipment why we're having a problem, but No, I'm non-discriminatory here. We got some of the other color as well. Okay? So anyway, what we want is this on the right side. What we want is the ability for the plant roots to go down. They have to have some room to grow. If you have a high water table like on the left, you're going to choke off your roots, and you're just not going to have the crop that you're looking for. So, some of the farm benefits of drain tile. Now, I'll just say this. If you're talking to any salesman, they're going to make everything sound amazingly fantastic. Well, what I'm offering you is the chance for 25% more yield, less compaction, all these things. And you might go, come on, tile's really not going to help me with all that. No, it does. It's a fact. It's awesome. We have so many different advantages to drain tile. I just get excited about it all the time because I've experienced it firsthand on all our ground. Here's one of the big things too. We have a lot of, and we're going to talk about it a little bit later when we talk about soils, but we'll talk about saline issues here in Manitoba. So as you can see, tile drainage decreases salts. So this is some work that AgVise had done, and you can see the difference over time. Okay, in 2002, they started with lots of salt. By 2006, the salt level had gone down. By 2011, most of those areas, everything was in pretty good shape. It does take some time, though, okay? I just wanted to share this with you real quick. Just a few years ago, a farmer sent me this. He goes, hey, here was my ground before tiling, and here was his story. This was the email that he sent Darren and me. He said, I wanted you to know about my drain tile story. Started the process a few years ago. I'm expecting my 2021 corn to be 30 to 35 bushels better. And anyway, what I got a charge out of is he said, about a month ago or so, Darren was asking folks what they liked best about their tile. I can tell you that what I enjoyed most this year was not having to pull out my 2-row planter to replant the field. And believe me, we had to do that a number of times on our farm. Anyway, here was the ground just 1 year later after tiling. And you can see what nice crop he ended up raising. All right. So a lot of people will tell you, well, tile's not that great for the environment, and there might be more nitrogen in the water. Okay, the drinking water quality standard in both the United States and Canada is 10 parts per million of nitrate nitrogen. That's super important to know because you're almost never going to find tile water that's got even 10 parts per million of nitrate nitrogen. The other big thing is this. Phosphorus is actually the #1 limiting factor for algae growth in fresh water in the world today. By the way, in the United States, the largest phosphorus polluter of the Mississippi River, people talk about this all the time, it's actually the city of Chicago, and that's according to our own government. The city of Chicago dumps sewage into the Illinois River. Insane. Okay, yet, farmers are to blame for water quality issues. Here's the other thing. You have maybe heard about the zone of hypoxia in the Gulf of Mexico. Or I should say, in the Gulf of America. We're going to talk about Trump a little bit later. Not much, but anyway. Okay, so with the Gulf of America, they've got this zone of hypoxia down there. Who gets the blame for that zone of hypoxia? Farmers. They say, well, farmers are polluting the water, and it's leading to all these fish kills in the Gulf of Mexico or Gulf of America. All right, so I went to this seminar, this is probably a few years ago, and I wanted to go there because it was one of our country's leading experts on this zone of hypoxia. And he goes through this entire presentation. I spend all this time there, and I go up to him afterwards, and I said, hey, that was a great presentation, but you didn't answer my 2 questions. And he goes, well, what are they? And I said, how far back do you have records on this zone of hypoxia? He said, about 100 years. And I said, okay, so you probably know where my next question's going. How big was the zone of hypoxia 100 years ago? You know what he said? About the same size as today. This is God's honest truth. It's about the same size as today after 100 years. Seriously, that's what he said. Okay? When fresh water, and if you've never been to New Orleans before, you need to go there sometime and just see the Mississippi River. It's unbelievably mammoth. There's so much fresh water that's dumping into salt water. Guess what happens when fresh water meets salt water? The fresh water stays above the level of the salt water, preventing oxygen from getting down to the salt water, which leads to fish kills and hypoxia. It's a naturally occurring thing. It's been happening for thousands of years. So don't let the media pour this nonsense into your head saying farmers are causing the problem. That is absolutely not true. All right. So I often will tell people, tile's great for the environment. And in fact, I was doing a little interview right before this, and we were talking about this very thing. And I'll bring up what the interviewer said to me, okay, in just a second. But let me show you this. These are some of the benefits of drain tile. But the biggest thing I want you to do, so when you go home today, or on your way home when you're driving, when somebody else is driving the car, not you, but I would say read this, okay? Download this right here, Environmental Benefits of Tile Drainage out of University of Guelph. It's 86 different studies. It's 14 pages. You'll get through it pretty quick, and it will give you all the data on why drain tile is great for the environment. But anyway, one of the biggest things that I would say for me as a farmer is I have some rolling hills, and it really helped reduce my erosion. The studies show that, yes, if you want to go no-till, that's the biggest thing you can do to reduce erosion. Number 2 is drain tile. You most often will reduce erosion 40 to 60%. It's very substantial. And the reason why, again, is if you've got somewhere for rain to soak in because that drain tile is there, now you don't have runoff, now you don't have that erosion. And I even didn't understand this fully until we started putting tile in on our farm, and I could visually see it, like, oh, there is a difference here where we've got that tile in the ground. Anyway, I mentioned this, the interviewer that I was talking to just a little bit ago. This was one of the questions that came up. If you tile, aren't you going to flood out the people downstream? Okay, so many people get confused by that. Tile actually reduces flooding. Okay, here's the data for you. It's usually a flooding reduction of 15 to 30%, and let me just explain a little bit why. Okay, how does the farmer pay for drain tile? Where do they come up with the money? Where does the farmer come up with the money to pay for that drain tile? Well, with yield increase, right? So if you have, for example, like we raise a lot of corn on our farm. If I'm going to raise a 250 bushel corn crop or a 100 bushel corn crop, which one removes more water from the soil? The 250 bushel corn. Okay, it's plain as day. Once you think about it for just a second, you go, oh, okay, yeah. One of the main reasons I'm going to reduce flooding is I'm going to use more water. We've seen it on our own farm. I have some areas that used to be wet. We used to have water running out of the tile every year. We don't even have it anymore because we're raising some 300 bushel corn in those spots. It's unbelievable. Our soil is so healthy and we're using so much more water than we ever used to. All right, let me give you a quick example too on this flood reduction thing. So this was one field on our farm where we put in 13 miles of tile in a 75-acre field. By the way, you might say, well, that looks like a weird pattern. Trust me, this was the best thing to do. This center area here was always wet ever since the time Darren and I were kids. I just remember one time we were out walking soybeans. This is what we have to do. By the way, young people, you're lucky. You now get to run a sprayer. Darren and I had to walk our fields. We'd walk our soybean fields 3 times in the summer to pull all the weeds. Well, anyway, he's about 2.5 years younger than me, and I would always be just a little bit ahead of him. So I'm walking along in this field right here, and we're pulling weeds and everything, and I look back, and here comes Darren. He's walking along with one boot. I'm like, where's your other boot? I don't know, lost it in the mud there somewhere. That field still owns one of Darren's boots, but the point is, it was our worst field every year. It was a disaster. We put in this tile, and now it is one of our best fields. This next year, I'm planning on 275 bushel corn. Prior to tiling about 10 years ago, we averaged 100 bushel corn in this field. It's ridiculous. So here's what I wanted to show you. In that field, the U.S. Geological Survey, they have a monitoring well. Now, I get it. You don't want the government monitoring things you're doing, but I would just say it's really nice for me because every 5 minutes I can have a report on what's my water table in this particular field. So I'm monitoring this, and here's my example for you. In 2012, we had a great big rain. We had a 4-inch rain, then we had a 2.7-inch rain. I just wanted to show you this and graph it out for you because I have all the data. So here's what happened. Okay, you can see the water table went way up, then it slowly drained out over a couple weeks, then it went way up again with those couple of big rains. But check this out. Look at how many gallons that is. 8 million gallons. This is just a 75-acre field. 8 million gallons of water fell on that field, then 5.5 million. If we didn't have tile in that ground to begin with, we got the water table down here, so we had a reservoir, so now when it rained, it didn't have to run off. Okay? If we wouldn't have had that, the water table would have been higher, we would have had runoff off that field, and we would have had flooding in our area. That's just the way it goes. The other thing is, we monitor what do we have coming out for nutrients from time to time out of our tile lines. So remember when I said 10 parts per million is the drinking water standard for nitrate nitrogen? 2.4, okay? 2.4. This is very common what we see. It's drinking water quality. In fact, out of that lift station that we've got in this field, quite often our guys that work for us on the farm will take their water jugs and go fill up their water there from the tile water. It's drinking water quality, and I would argue it's probably better than almost anything you're getting. Even the bottled water you may have in Manitoba, I hate to tell you, it's got nitrate in it. Okay, all water has some level of nitrate in it. Don't panic. It's going to be less than 10 parts per million. It's fine. Here's the other big thing. Remember when I said phosphorus is our number one water quality issue that we've got in the world today? Look at this. You know what ND stands for? Non-detectable. Phosphorus doesn't move in soil. I'm not worried about phosphorus getting down into our tile lines. It's fine. The way that phosphorus typically gets into water is with soil erosion. Okay, if you have soil erosion, the phosphorus goes with it. If we can reduce erosion, which I just told you, tiling is great for reducing erosion. Now we have less phosphorus getting into our waters. Here's another thing. Road conditions, maintenance, perennial issue. But who do farmers blame for road problems? You know who. It's farmers and your big trucks. We're causing all the problems, right? No way. Absolutely not. No way. The main cause for road damage, I see it all over North America, it's water. Water is the number one enemy to roads. If we simply fix the water issue, we're going to have a lot better roads. I can give you plenty of examples of these, even off our own farm. And where we fix the drainage issue, all of a sudden our roads are way, way better. In the United States now, by the way, in the Midwest, what they do when they build new interstate highways is they put drain tile on both sides of the road and they tell the water where it's going to go. We're not just letting that water seep under the road and damage that road. So, again, I'll go back to why tile? Higher yield, longer and more predictable growing season. You can very slowly reduce high magnesium levels. Speed all field operations. Less chance for soil compaction. Earlier spring warm-up. Reduce stuck situations, plant earlier, fewer seed and seedling diseases. You can spray more timely, lower high soil pH, and reduce salt levels. I know it sounds like a big sales pitch, but let me just share two last things with you. You will have improved soil health if you have good drainage. You have to have air in that soil if you want good soil health. But then the other thing that I often tell people is this, just setting the money aside for a second. Setting the money aside, the yield, all these other things, tiling on our farm made farming fun again. When we first bought a tile plow, it was 2007. We were farming like 35 different fields, and I had 3 that I could farm straight through. 3 out of 35. It was terrible. It was no fun. We were going back constantly to replant. And we wouldn't finish planting till June all the time. It was just a stinking nightmare. And one of the first fields we tiled, and we got it all planted straight through, first time ever. And I called my dad right away, and I said, Dad, we just planted this whole field straight through. Everything's done. He's like, no, you didn't. And I go, yes, we did. I'm like, this is awesome. We're doing more of this. This is fun. And since then, our yields have doubled in the last 20 years here, and we're not getting stuck all the time. By the way, when do people usually get stuck on your farm? Okay, by the way, I never got stuck. But, you know, for our people on the farm, they'd always get stuck. It'd be Friday night at 10 o'clock, right? Or you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's the worst possible time. I finally think, oh, I'm going out tonight. Nope, getting somebody unstuck. All right, so anyway, let's move on. I want to talk a little about soil testing and just soils in general. Let me ask you this question first. I have a soil test up on the screen. Okay, I want you to look at that for a second. It's also in your little handout there on page 5. I want you to look at that soil test, and I want to see a really quick show of hands. How many of you can read that soil test and now you know how to fertilize your farm? Raise your hand if you can do it. Okay, now please keep your hand up. Look around the room. Look around the room, see how many hands are up. Okay, now let me ask you one other question. Let me see a show of hands. How many of you farm or work for a farmer? Raise your hand. Okay? All right, now, that's many, many more than how many can read a soil test, isn't it? I want you to think about this for just a second. On your farm, how much money will you spend on fertilizer in the next 30 years? And by the way, we're hoping that our yields go up. When our yields go up, do we need more or less fertilizer? We need more. Now, there's also something called inflation. Do you think that fertilizer prices over time are going to go down or up? Now, as a farmer, I'm always hoping they're going to go down. But let's be real, okay? Guys, ladies, we are going to spend a lot more on fertilizer in the next 30 years than we may be thinking today. My whole point is this. What's the most important thing you've got on your farm, other than you? It's your soil. And if you don't know how to read a soil test, I just really encourage you, think about this, learn about this, and also, I just want you to think about what lessons did you learn from your parents and your grandparents growing up on the farm. Now, I get it, when you were growing up, you probably thought they knew nothing. As you got older, maybe you realized, I guess they do know something. But what did you learn on the farm? You probably learned a lot about operating equipment, and I mean, maybe it was livestock or whatever else, all the different things you learned. But just think about like your grandparents. What did they have to spend on fertilizer in their farm operation? Like when I was growing up on the farm, we had a lot of livestock. We barely spent any money on fertilizer. Okay, so I get it. Why would you learn how to read a soil test and make your own fertilizer recommendations? Why would you learn this when you go, yeah, I'm only spending a few dollars on that? Now, it's our number one expense on the farm. It's our number one thing. Like on our farm, and we're not even that big of farmers. Like I was saying, we farm about 3,500 acres. In the last 10 years, we've spent something like $5 million. $5 million, and we're not even that big a farmer. Okay? And it's going to be more in the future. So my whole point is just this. I just want you for a second to think about what should I be passing on for knowledge to my kids and my grandkids. Now, if you're young, you're like, seriously, think about this for a second. This, in my opinion, is one of the most important things. If we can manage our soil better, if we can fix our soil, we can make it super healthy and productive. That means good things for you in the future, and it means good things for your kids and your grandkids. It's awesome. So let me give you just a few basic things. If you got a pen, I'd encourage you, write this down. Okay, here are some of just the most basic things that you need to know if you're going to learn how to read a soil test, because you can do it. By the way, this is one of the best things that my dad ever told me. And he would say this often, in between him yelling at me for doing stuff wrong, you know. But anyway, he would just say, Brian, nobody's going to care more about your farm than you. And you're smart. Now, you may not be the smartest person that's out there, but I'll tell you what, if you work your tail off, you can learn anything. There's nothing you can't learn. There's nothing you can't do. Okay? If you set your mind to this, you can absolutely learn how to read a soil test. I can teach you how to do it in one day. It's not that difficult. Okay? I'll give you the basics starting here. How many pounds are there in 6 inches of soil across 1 acre? Anybody know? It's about 2 million pounds. It's about 2 million pounds. And here is why this is so important to know. Because when you get a soil test, well, it's just like this soil test that I got right here. Okay, what does it say? It says ppm, ppm, ppm. What that means is parts per million. Well, as a farmer, I don't give a rip about parts per million. I care about pounds per acre. So we have to know how many pounds there are in my soil test. Most people do a 6-inch soil test. Okay, so to convert it to pounds per acre, you just multiply times 2, because we're representing 2 million pounds. In 12 inches of soil, how much does that weigh? Weighs about 4 million pounds. So you just take parts per million times 4. Okay, next. What electrical charge does soil have? Positive or negative? Anybody know? Negative. It's got a negative electrical charge. You have to know this, and here's the reason why. Which nutrients are the most leachable? What do you think about first? Throw it out. What do you say? What's the most leachable nutrient? Everybody says nitrogen. No, you're wrong. You know why? You didn't give me the right form of nitrogen. There are 2 main forms of nitrogen. There's nitrate and there's ammonium. Ammonium is positively charged. Ammonium is positively charged. So if I've got negative soil and positively charged ammonium, there's a reason why ammonium doesn't leach. Why? A positive and a negative attract. Nitrate is negatively charged. What did negative and negative do? They repel. Your soil is literally forcing nitrate out. This is why you have to know soil is negatively charged. Okay, here are the other ones that you could jot down if you want to. So nitrate is the most leachable. Sulfate will leach at about half the speed of nitrate. Okay, sulfate will leach at about half the speed of nitrate, and then boron would be next. It doesn't leach as fast as sulfate. Also, I would throw two other things in there. Chloride. A lot of people get worried about potash because it's got chloride. Well, guess what? Chloride's leachable. Don't worry about it. But then the other thing is salt. Okay, now you might not think of salt as a nutrient, but keep in mind, salt is leachable. That's why we have to have good drainage to get that salt flushed out of our ground. Okay, which nutrients are the least leachable? Number one is phosphorus. Phosphorus doesn't move in heavy soil. Okay, unless you way overdo it with phosphorus, you could make it move. But in a normal farm situation, phosphorus is stuck. Wherever you put it, it's not moving. Same thing with zinc, same thing with copper. Phosphorus, zinc, and copper are all basically immobile in the soil. So here's a little chart for you. I've got this on page 6 in your handout. What we're talking about here, what I was just talking about is mobility in the soil, okay, over on the right side. Mobility in the plant is something a little bit different. What that means is if, like, nitrogen in the plant, or let's take phosphorus. Okay, I said phosphorus is immobile in the soil. It is mobile in the plant. That means that if your plant starts to run short on phosphorus, getting it out of the soil, it can rob it from the lower leaves. That's why you will see nutrient deficiencies with N, P, and K on the lower leaves of the plant. This example that I've got here, too, is another one, nitrogen deficiency and potassium deficiency. Now, I went to South Dakota State University when I was a lot younger than I am today. And one of the things that they told me at South Dakota State University is they said, Brian, there's so much potassium naturally in our soils all throughout this region, you shouldn't have to put potassium out for your crop. That's literally what they told me. I was going to college back in the 1980s. Well, here's what I noticed. Way over on the right side, if you have yellowing on the outside edge of plant leaves, on the lower leaves, that's potassium deficiency. Okay, the potassium is getting moved to the newer growth because your plant is short on K. Nitrogen, it's a yellowing more up the midrib. So I don't care if you have corn or wheat or whatever crop, these are the symptoms you're looking for. If it's purpling on the lower leaves, that's phosphorus deficiency. But anyway, I started noticing a whole bunch of that potassium deficiency way over there. How is potassium held in our soils? You have potassium in your soil too. What form is it in your soil? In a lot of cases, it's in feldspars. You know what feldspars are? They're rocks. And how quickly does rock break down and come available for your crop? Not real fast. So my point here is sometimes we get some information that seems like it makes a lot of sense, but we're after practical, in the real world, what's really going on in our soils. And this is one of the big things we've found over the years. The number one nutrient deficiency we find here in Manitoba or in my state of South Dakota, it's potassium, and it's not even close. All right, so here's the other thing. A lot of times, I don't care what crop you're looking at, if you see the lower leaves start to show some symptoms like this, it's probably just a nutrient deficiency, but you're going to say, hey, my crop is firing, I'm short on moisture. Probably the most important thing that I can't stress to you enough when it comes to fertility is if your crop starts to run short on any one nutrient, what it's going to do is it's going to start pulling more water in to bring that nutrient in. Okay? And when that happens, you've made your crop a water waster. So you farm in a dry area. I farm in a dry area. One of the most important things is getting that soil balanced. We got to have ample and balanced soil fertility. That means our crop uses less water, so there's more water for later in the season, and we can actually have a good crop despite having drought. Oh, the other thing that I'll say is the micronutrients, for the most part, they aren't mobile in that plant. So if your crop starts to run short on sulfur, for example, sulfur and the micronutrients aren't mobile, well, then you're going to see a yellowing on the upper leaves of the plant. So this is how you can determine, all right, is it a micronutrient or sulfur, or is it one of the major nutrients that shorten my crop? Oh, by the way, when you see stuff like this, you see that your crop has a visual nutrient deficiency, you've already lost a ton of yield, okay? So I get it. You want to try to fix things for this year. You've already lost the yield. I'd focus a lot more on what am I going to do next year so this doesn't happen again. So if you want to figure out, well, what do I need to do next year so this doesn't happen again? Here are my 12 basic steps on how I read a soil test. I always start with soil pH. I look at pH first. I move on to cation exchange capacity. I go to organic matter. I look at base saturation, nitrogen, phosphorus. Then I start looking at sulfur and the micronutrients. A couple of things that I got highlighted here for you. Okay, one is Malic 3. There are a lot of different soil tests out there. I personally like the Malic 3 test. That's my favorite for two reasons. Number one, it's cheap. I can get that test done for half the price of a lot of other soil tests, and it's still very, very accurate. But number two is with manganese especially, we just have not found that a lot of the other soil tests are very accurate. The DTPA is the common micronutrient soil test in Manitoba, and I don't like it. What we've been able to prove over time is the DTPA soil test with manganese correlates to one thing only, and it's not manganese. It correlates only to soil pH. The higher your soil pH, the lower your manganese, period. The lower the soil pH, the higher the manganese, period. That's it. Doesn't actually tell me how much manganese is in the ground. But anyway, the other thing, I mentioned potassium. One of the biggest challenges that you have, just like I have, is there's a lot of calcium and or magnesium in your soil. So most of Manitoba has higher calcium and magnesium levels. With potassium, potassium is constantly fighting magnesium. If I had more time, I'd show you all my data on that in the plant. So basically, if I don't have a sufficient level of potassium in that soil in ratio with my magnesium, in the plant, what gets in the plant, it'll be mostly magnesium, not nearly enough potassium. I want to get those things more in balance so I get more potassium into the plant. So that's where we talk about on this base saturation test, I gotta have potassium 4% to 8%. And I will tell you this, you will run into some people who will tell you, oh, the base saturation test isn't important. It doesn't matter. It's not that big a deal. Let me show you some data here in just a second. Before I do, I will tell you this. My target for soil fertility in heavy soil for all these different nutrients, I've got for you on that page right there, on page 7. Now, I'm not going to say this is what you should be doing on your farm. I'm going to share some things here over the next, my remaining, 50 minutes or so. I'm going to share some things about what we're doing on our farm. I'm just saying this is what I do. You do whatever you want to do for your farm. But through trial and error and through some other data we've got, we've kind of figured if I want max yield on my farm, this is usually what I'm shooting for. The other thing that I want you to think about for just 1 second, because you might go, oh my goodness, Brian, you want me to spend all this money on phosphorus and potassium. Look, if you own the ground, like for us, we own probably 80% of the ground that we farm. If you own the ground, I just want you to think about this for 1 second, okay? Think about what are you going to spend on fertilizer in the next 10 years, okay? Just think about how many dollars am I going to spend this year and next year and every year for 10 years. Just if you were to sit down for a second, just make a quick projection, okay? Add it all up, and here's what I want you to at least consider doing on a few acres. Take years 8, 9, and 10, add up those dollars, bring them all forward into year 1. So now you're spending 4 years in one shot. For, not nitrogen or sulfur, those leach. But I'm talking about my P&K budget, okay? And take it all up front. Here's where I'm going with this. What I'm suggesting you even think about is I'm not saying you spend a single dollar more in the next 10 years. I'm just saying move more of it up front. And if what I'm telling you isn't giving you the yield you like, the last 3 years of your farming in those 10 years, just mine it back out of the soil. By the way, I got a quick story to tell you. So this is I don't even remember how many years ago now, before my dad retired. So my dad, he brings my brother Darren and me in one day. This is 15, 20 years ago, something like that. And he goes, guys, I'm getting about ready to retire. It's coming soon here. But you know what? I've been farming this ground for a lot of time, trying to build up my soil. So I think it's about time I start mining out the nutrients. And I'm like, well, wait a second here. Aren't we going to farm this ground? He goes, well, yeah, you are, but I'm going to mine this stuff out. I'm like, oh my goodness. I'll be honest. I thought, well, he's kind of being a jerk here. But anyway, so he does this for the next 3 years. Year one, what happens with his profitability? Well, year one's pretty darn good because he got the soil built up. By year two, not quite as good. By year three, we owned a grain elevator at the time, and we'd bring all our grain into this grain elevator, and our guys at the grain elevator go, what's the deal with this grain? It's low test weight and poor quality and everything else. We're like, yep, that's our dad's stuff. He's the one who decided he was going to mine everything back out of the soil. So our dad made one critical error when he decided he was going to rent the ground to us. He decided he was going to do it on shares. So the very year that he retires, in the fall, I had trucks showing up like you couldn't believe. So phosphorus, potassium were showing up on our farm. And one day my brother Darren goes, what? Didn't we just have like multiple trucks here yesterday? What's up with all these trucks? Was Dad okay with this? And I'm like, oh yeah, sure, he's good. Everything's good. So what I did, I knew my dad was going to Arizona that winter for a little bit. So I strategically waited. And you think I'm kidding about this. This is a true story. I waited until he was in Arizona, and then I sent him the fertilizer bill. And I'm not kidding. I get a call, because I still remember it to this day. He calls me up and he goes, Brian, hey, I got this bill from you guys. I think you made a mistake. I think you sent me the whole fertilizer bill for the whole farm. And I go, no, Dad, that's just your share for your ground. And I'm going to leave out the rest of that conversation because there are some women and children in the audience. But I will just tell you that he chewed me out for 9 months straight. Now, fortunately, I had a 2,000-mile barrier for the first couple months, so that was great. But anyway, what happened come fall? Yields were better. Grain quality was better. Dry down was better. Everything was better. You got to fertilize. And a big thing here is, what's your balance of nutrients? It's not just as simple as saying, oh, I need nitrogen and phosphorus. No, that's not enough. Okay, one of the things we're using now, it's this software program called Verify. We can do satellite imagery and all these other great things. But the two big things we can do are this. We can, if we don't soil test, we can take a yield map and we can generate a variable rate fertilizer application map. It's so powerful because think about it, even on your farm. How are you doing fertilizer if you don't soil test? Here's exactly how we did it. We just go blanket rate. We'd say, all right, well, here's my yield goal for whatever crop I'm raising, and we'll put out enough NP and K for that crop, and we're going to call her good. But let's be honest, you have areas in that field that are yielding great and other areas that are yielding poor, don't you? Okay, so if you put the same rate over the whole thing, you're under-fertilizing your best areas and you're way over-fertilizing your worst areas. So one of the biggest things that farmers have been asking us about here for the last few months is help me cut costs. I just saw this survey in the United States where so many farmers want to cut their fertilizer rates and everything else. And I'm like, look, how about instead we don't cut, but what we do is we cut in the areas we can cut. We put the dollars where they're going to be more effective. That's what's most important. I'll tell you one other quick story. So back in 2006, my brother Darren and I went over to Ukraine. Now, please don't go to Ukraine today. But anyway, when I came back, people said, well, what did you think of Ukraine? I said two things. Number one, I said it's Iowa soil with South Dakota rainfall. In other words, they don't get a lot of rain, but they still have great soil. Number two, I said, they're farming, a lot of these guys are still farming the way Stalin intended, which was 10,000 hectare farms. That's 25,000 acres, all farmed exactly the same. By the way, if they would have knocked me out and I woke up in Ukraine, I would have said, hey, am I in Fargo, North Dakota? It was similar plants, trees, crops, soil, everything. It looked very similar to Fargo, North Dakota. But anyway, if you stop and think about it for a second, when you've got somebody who's going to farm 25,000 acres, all the same, Isn't that to some degree what we're doing, maybe on a little bit smaller scale, when we just go out there and blanket rate fertilizer? It's not the most efficient way to put that fertilizer out. So I'd really encourage you to think about this. Use your yield map and variable rate that fertilizer. And then the other thing is, we've been doing this for 5 years. We are matching all our soil test points to yield. And it's allowed us to create things like this. Okay? So, for example, on the bottom is my corn yield. On this side is my percent base saturation potassium. And I've got charts like this for nutrient balance and a whole bunch of different things. But I just was going to show you this real quick. None of my good yields were where we had less than 3% base saturation potassium. And this is at the end of the season, not at the start. So at the start of the season, I probably have to be up around 4 just to maximize my yield potential. But because I have my own data from my own farm, I don't have to listen to anybody trying to sell me anything, any fertilizer expert. I got my own data telling me, hey, more potassium means more yield on my farm, and I know it would on yours as well. All right, here's another thing. I commonly hear this coming out of soybeans and some of these legume crops that, well, you get a nitrogen credit for that legume crop. And I always tell people, yeah, that's nonsense. There's no such thing as a nitrogen credit. And I know you've heard it. I've heard it a million times too. There's a nitrogen credit for soybeans or alfalfa or whatever it is. That is not true. Okay? There's no guarantee you're going to have a bunch of nitrogen there. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying you won't have any. I'm simply saying we don't know how much. Okay, this is just an example off our own farm, where coming out of soybeans, I had a couple of fields that I've got here. One had 34 pounds. The other had 136 pounds of nitrogen. 136! That was a 330-acre field. It saved me, that year nitrogen was really expensive. I was able to cut my nitrogen by 100 pounds on my corn crop. It saved me $30,000. All because I pulled some soil tests. Even out of corn, sometimes we have way more nitrogen than we think. If you're not testing, you're guessing. And my issue with guessing is when you've got, like we do on our farm, millions of dollars of crop at stake, why would I want to guess? If I'm going to guess, I might as well go to Las Vegas and throw it on the roulette table or whatever else. Okay? I don't want to guess. I want data. That helps me be a lot smarter. By the way, soil nitrate tests for me, they cost $5. Okay, I don't know what you're spending for nitrate tests, but all I can tell you is this. I don't mind spending $5 a few times in my fields. It's no big thing. Here's another thing that fertilizer dealers never tell you in my experience. Your soil organic matter releases nutrients for free. So we usually figure 20 to 30 pounds of nitrogen. We figure 4 to 7 pounds of phosphate. Now, granted, we're a little warmer than you. I'd probably figure a little bit less than that if I was you. But my point is, for free every single year, you will get some nitrogen out of your soil's organic matter. Okay? Test your soil a little bit. See what's out there. It's going to help you. Saline. Let's talk about saline and sodic soils, and then we're going to move on to some other stuff. Okay, so here's a saline soil. What we mean by that is you've got soluble salts there that are high. Okay, the key thing is these are soluble salts. Okay, if you have salt issues, we have a drainage problem, period. All right, and you can often see that because boron is somewhat leachable. Look at that one is kind of high. Sulfur, that's leachable. Look at that one. That's ridiculous. 1,792 parts per million. And then even the nitrate is sitting there high. We have a drainage problem. Fix the drainage, and then your saline issue is typically going to go away. So sure, we'd like to have you run a soil test, but number 2 right there, add drain tile, and it'll flush out. By the way, if you're having issues, you already have tile out there, and you're still not having the best drainage, make sure your calcium levels are high. You want your calcium levels at about 75%, and then you want to reduce compaction. Worst case scenario, you can always incorporate some high carbon residue and make things a little better. Now, your government likes to interfere with your farming sometimes, don't they? And your government, just like my government, has started talking about this thing called nitrous oxide. Nitrous oxide is 300 times more potent than carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas. That's why people are talking about this. In saline soils, did you know that nitrous oxide discharge can be 40 to 50 times more than in non-saline soil? So, if anybody gives you a hard time about drain tile and tiling, you just tell them, look, I'm just trying to save the planet here. I'm trying to reduce my nitrous oxide out there. I have to tile. okay? Anyway, these are facts. This is the truth. So other than fixing saline soils, the best way to reduce nitrous oxide, just don't let it escape into the atmosphere. So inject your nitrogen, use nitrogen stabilizers. Usually these things are going to help you in the nitrous oxide. All right, let's talk about sodic soils real quick. So if you've got a sodic soil, you have a high level of sodium. Sodium and salt are two different things. Sodium and salt are two different things. If your sodium content is high, and by the way, look at that one right there, 33%. If you got 33% sodium, that soil's dead. That soil's dead. I'll tell you one other quick story. So I was doing a soils clinic, this is 3 years ago, and right afterwards, a lady, a middle-aged lady, comes walking up to me, and she's crying. This is after a soils clinic. I'm like, well, boy, I knew I wasn't the best speaker in the world, but crying? I mean, what's going on? What's wrong? And anyway, she comes up, and she's like, now I finally understand what's going on. I have some ground where we can't even get a tillage tool into the ground, and here's my soil test. And this is the one. 33% sodium. The ground was literally dead. She had gotten this ground from her grandpa. Her grandpa turned the ground over to her to farm and try to make it better, and the ground's dead. My question for you is this. Did this happen overnight? How long do you think that took? How many years was that sodium percentage above the level we like to see, which is 1%, maybe 2% at the most? How many years do you think it was above that? 30, 40, 50? It was a long time. Remember what I was saying earlier. Think about your kids and your grandkids. Do you really want your granddaughter, like her, to come up crying at a soils clinic because you killed the ground that you now gave to her? That's actually what happened. It's bad. Once you see that level starting to get even above 1 or 2%, it's time to fix it. So here's how you do it. First thing, you got to run a soil test. What I care about is you got to look at the sodium level, the calcium level, and the sulfur level. By the way, we already know the soil pH is going to be high because sodium raises soil pH 4 to 1 compared to calcium. Okay? So add drain tile number 1. After that, if your soil already has high sulfur, then just let the tile do its thing. Here's what we're trying to do with that sodium. I told you sodium is not salt. It's two different things. But what we want to do is make it a salt. Remember when I said earlier, salts are leachable? So if I can take my sodium and combine it with sulfate to make a salt, now it's leachable. Now I can flush it out of the ground. That's what I'm trying to do. If my soil has low sulfur, free lime, and high calcium, then I got to use elemental sulfur, and it might be costly. It might take a long time. I mean, if I go back to this soil test right here, if I saw this soil test, you know what I would do if this was my farm? I would give that ground to my brother to try to farm it. You think I'm joking, but no, I wouldn't be able to get away with it because he also knows how to read a soil test. But anyway, it's going to take you years to make that ground better. It's going to take time. It's going to take investment. We could have fixed it so simply years ago. Okay, so anyway, if your soil, way at the bottom there, if your soil has low sulfur and calcium, less than 75%, well, then use gypsum. But there's a blanket statement out there from a lot of people. Well, you have a sodic soil, use gypsum. Not necessarily. We got to find out what we have for sulfur out there before we ever do that. And we also have to find out what we have for calcium in that soil. Because if we already have too much calcium and too much sulfur, if you throw more out there, you might make the problem even worse. Okay? Calcium and magnesium are really important nutrients. They may be the most important nutrients for the soil. Here's one of the things I want you to think about, though. This right here. Calcium is a significantly larger molecule than magnesium. So if you've got a high magnesium soil, you're going to have poor drainage. And I just want you to think about this. Okay, let's say we're sitting in this room and we fill this room with basketballs right over the tops of our heads. We fill the room with basketballs. Are we still going to be able to breathe? Yeah, probably. There's space in between those basketballs. In soil, we'd call that pore space. Okay, now let's say that we took out all the basketballs and we filled this room with sand. Now are we going to be able to breathe? Nope, we're dead. Same thing happens in your soil with excess magnesium. There's no pore space there for the oxygen to get there, and it kills your roots. It kills your soil microbes. We've got to have a good balance of calcium in the soil. You want that calcium level to be at least 60%, and personally, I like it a lot closer to 70%. Okay, so here's the big thing. You can loosen a tight soil with more calcium. You can tighten a sandy soil with more magnesium. Those are kind of my basic things that I would say there. Also, excess magnesium raises that soil pH 1.6 to 1 compared to calcium. All right, just a couple of things on sulfur. So I often joke with people saying, thanks to our darn clean air that we've got now, I have to spend a bunch of money on sulfur every year. When I was growing up, back in the good old days, we had acid rain all the time, and we'd get free sulfur in our fields. Well, we did. By the way, if you want free sulfur today, go farm in China. Okay, polluted air means you're getting plenty of free sulfur. So, because we have cleaner air, seriously, we have to spend more money on sulfur now, and with our higher yields, we just need more sulfur. But here's where I wanted to go with this. I've had a lot of questions, especially here in Manitoba, because there's a lot of high soil pH. And people say, well, can I just use elemental sulfur? You guys talk about elemental sulfur to lower pH. Let me explain how and why this lowers pH. Okay? The reason why, elemental sulfur is kind of a weird product. Look at the conversion there. You have to have bacteria plus the sulfur plus oxygen plus water. Then it leads to sulfuric acid. Sulfuric acid. Okay? But that's only if you have good drainage. If you don't have enough air in that soil, then you're not going to end up with the hydrogen sulfate that you should. You'll end up with hydrogen sulfide, and your soil will smell like rotten eggs. So I've seen many companies, too, testing elemental sulfur, and they don't fix the drainage first, and they go, oh, that didn't work. It's like, guys, you're missing step one. Step one is you have to fix the drainage first. If you don't have tile in the ground, forget about the elemental sulfur. Just forget about it. It's not going to work for you. Okay? Get your ground fixed for drainage, then use elemental sulfur. Here's the big thing I wanted to stress to you, though, and I've got it highlighted in yellow. Your high soil pH is a result of a nutrient imbalance in your soil. Now, what's wrong? I don't know. What's high? I don't know. Show me your soil test, and I can probably help you out. But I'm just saying, there's a nutrient imbalance. If you got an 8 pH, there's something wrong. On our farm, one of the things, it was kind of weird. I never thought this would lower my pH. I was really short on potassium on some ground. We put a whole bunch of potassium out there, and our pH went down 0.5 point. Seriously. You got to fix your nutrient imbalance. Your pH will start to regulate. And one of the most important things is, if you're thinking about lowering your soil pH, just do everything you can to raise a great crop. Your crop will kick out organic acids out of the roots, and it will naturally lower soil pH a little bit. All right. That's all I've got for soil fertility. Let's turn to crop protection products and just some of the things that we do on our farm to get higher yields. Now, I'm going to give you a little disclaimer here. I'm from the United States. Sorry. So I'm going to talk in maybe some terms, or I'll talk about some products that may not be labeled here. They're labeled under a different name, whatever else. I would say this, though. I surveyed a bunch of farmers from Manitoba before I came up here. With our radio show, we have Canadian farmers that are constantly sending us their soil tests and asking questions and everything else, and we really appreciate that. But anyway, I asked a number of Manitoba farmers, just what would you like me to talk about today? And one of the big things, obviously, most people are interested in is weed control. So these are what the guys told me were the worst weeds in Manitoba. The only one I don't have on my farm is foxtail barley. I've had a little bit in the past, but not much. But I'll just tell you, kochia is a big issue. That was probably my number one weed problem 2 years ago. While buckwheat was my number one weed problem, it was probably 8 or 9 years ago. But at one point or another on my farm, every one of these things has been a major issue. And then finally, will water hemp be here soon? I hate to tell you, but it probably will be. Every water hemp plant, well, I shouldn't say everyone, but a water hemp plant can put on 1 million seeds. And they found water hemp now resistant to ALS, to glyphosate, to a whole bunch of different chemistries out there. So it's moving this way. All right, so canola, herbicides. When I was talking to the guys, they said kochia, wild buckwheat, and water hemp are their biggest issues. Here's the big problem. Pre-emerge, what are you going to do that's going to solve those things? Okay, so with trifluralin and sonolan, I can do a pretty good job on kochia and water hemp. I'm not going to tell you it's going to be perfect. I will say this, though. Sonolan, and that's something that we used, back even when I was a kid. So we've used it for a long time. It is better than trifluralin, and it doesn't carry over as much. So that's why it costs a little bit more money. But I will promise you, if you put Sonaland full rate side by side with the trifluralin full rate, trifluralin will probably carry over, and the trifluralin won't be quite as good on the kochia or water hemp. So if you got a major issue with those weeds, I'd probably spend the money and put the Sonaland out there. By the way, we're on page 10 in your handout there. But, I mean, are we really going to do much with Trilate or Fargo, Command? I mean, those products aren't great on wild buckwheat, kochia, water hemp. Could they help a little bit? Sure. Post-emerge, number one thing that I would tell you is Liberty. Let me give you a couple of things on Liberty, though, because I don't think I have this coming up. So if you want your Liberty herbicide to work better, here's my advice to you. Okay, there was a product we used to use when I was a kid. It was called Basagran. If you think about Liberty exactly like how you think about Basagran, it will work pretty well for you. So here were our rules. When we would spray Basagran, we wanted 150 points of heat plus humidity. We'd add up the temperature plus the humidity. And guys, I realize we're in Manitoba here, okay? I realize you're not quite as hot as we are, and it's going to be hard to get 150 points when you add up the heat and humidity on any day. But my point is, the closer you can get to that, the better weed kill you are going to get. The other thing with old Basagran, just like Liberty, it's a contact killer. You have to have small spray droplets. You have to coat the whole plant. You need 20 gallons of water per acre. You need a little more spray pressure. And then the other thing there, I say YAMS. So ammonium sulfate. There are a lot of guys in the United States, just like here in Canada, that don't want to lift these 51-pound bags of ammonium sulfate. They go, give me an ammonium sulfate replacement product, Brian. Well, with many other products, we can probably do that, but we can't with Liberty, and here's why. Because even if you talk to the chemists at BSF, they will tell you the ammonium sulfate is part of the active ingredient. It's part of how it kills the plant. Here's what Liberty does. It overloads the plant with ammonia. Okay? How it kills the weed is it overloads it with ammonia. We need the ammonium sulfate desperately to make that Liberty work better. And quite frankly, 3 pounds per acre is the rate. I've had guys bump it to 4 or 5 pounds per acre, and that does help a little bit. It gives more ammonia. Okay? So, post-emerge, other than Liberty, I can't kill all 3 of those weeds for sure. Roundup, I got resistant kochia and resistant water hemp. Beyond Extra, okay, that's ALS. It's same thing as Raptor or, in the United States, or we used to use Pursuit that's very similar. Okay, we have ALS-resistant kochia and ALS-resistant water hemp. Now, granted, the Beyond Extra is pretty good on wild buckwheat, but otherwise, not going to kill everything. Liberty's my only choice if I want to kill everything. Okay, Clethodim and Assure 2 are good grass options, but that's kind of where I'm at. Okay, fungicides, the number one thing that guys said is, how do I stop sclerotinia? Look, I have sclerotinia white mold in my soybeans. I've had it so bad in the past, it's killed 100% of the beans on some acres. So now we've addressed that, okay? We have drain tile there. We thin out the plant stand there. One of the big nutrients, and you may have never have heard this before, but to help sclerotinia, you got to have a good level of manganese in your soil. Not magnesium, manganese, micronutrient. There is a direct correlation with manganese and reducing sclerotinia in a plant. That is a big deal. Okay? Beyond that, you can't just say, oh, I'm going to spray one time and I'm going to totally solve my sclerotinia problem. Yeah, good luck. Okay? Sclerotinia is a tough one. You got to stay with it. You got to stay after it. And then insecticides. Flea beetles. Everybody was talking to me about flea beetles. I'm like, oh my gosh. I've sprayed flea beetles on my farm too. Don't have to do it so much anymore because imidacloprid, clothianidin, and thiamethoxam, they are all pretty good as seed treatments. But then post-emerge, I have many different insecticides that'll do it. You just have to be scouting and get them early. I wanted to tell you one story quick too. So in the United States, there are a bunch of universities and some different people out there that have been saying, hey, if you have a leafy spurge issue in your pastures, just bring in these leafy spurge beetles and they'll eat up the leafy spurge. You know what leafy spurge beetles are? They're flea beetles. So when I was in college and right after college, I worked for FMC, and it was mainly an insecticide company back then. There were a lot of great entomologists there. And there was one entomologist that was a little bit of a mentor for me, and he goes, Brian, there are going to be people that are going to try to tell you to bring in beneficial insects. He said, watch out, because you never know what that insect is going to go to next when it runs out of its first food. okay? So there's no possible chance in the world I'm bringing leafy spurge beetles onto my farm, because then they're going to my corn, or if someday I choose to raise canola, they're going there next, okay? And it's all because the guy was too chintzy to spend a few dollars killing leafy spurge in some patches on his farm, okay? All right, let's keep moving. Wheat. So they're in the United States, and even here in Canada, there are a lot of fungicides, but these are the products I'm talking to guys about in the United States. What I always try to do, and I just want you to think about this yourself, there are all these different combinations, premixes they call them, and it's really usually just a combination of old stuff. So whenever some company comes with something new and it's a premix, just go, ooh, let's figure out what's actually in there. So what I always do is I break it down to what are the other names, the brand names of the products that are in these different fungicides, and I go, oh yeah, okay, well I've used Quadris before, I've used Tilt before, I've used whatever, Sultra or Levo. Okay, now I'm familiar with what that thing will do. The other thing I would say with wheat is be really careful at heading timing. You can't have a strobilurin fungicide there or you end up with more Don. This last year, for example, I was going through the state of North Dakota, and the wheat looked probably better than I've ever seen it in my life. I'm like, oh my gosh, some of these guys are gonna have record yield. But here was the problem. We had lots of moisture. We also had an early spring, early growing season. Whenever you have an early growing season, well, it's kind of like right now. We have no snow on our farm right now, and I mean, I love it as a farmer, and also I don't have to push the snow. But I always tell guys, look, guys, I hate to tell you this, I'm praying for 35 degree below Fahrenheit temperatures for like a week straight, because I want that frost to get way down in the ground to kill diseases and insects. Okay, last year the frost came out earlier than it ever had in my region. What that meant was more disease and more bugs. You have to pay attention to the weather a little bit. I knew it was coming, and I told guys, guys, you got ideal growing conditions here. You better be spraying. And with wheat, we spray 3 times typically. Okay, we're spraying right here at herbicide timing, at flag leaf, and then at heading. Now, you don't always have to do that. If you're in a drought year, whatever, you don't always have to do it. But when you've got that ideal year, I mean, wheat, it just doesn't tolerate disease very well. I jumped past one slide real quick. I'd just say there are ways to solve things like Ascochyta and Aphanomyces. So they keep coming with new fungicide products all the time, and it's pretty exciting. So anyway, we got some decent options for some of these tough diseases out there. All right, if you want your fungicide to work better, here's my advice to you. Number 1, just understand that fungicides, if you're going to spray a foliar fungicide, it only moves in the xylem of the plant. So here again, if you slept through that biology class in college, the xylem only moves up. The phloem, it can transport stuff down and up, all right? So since fungicides only move up, that means if you don't cover the lower part of the plant or you don't cover the lower part of a leaf, it is unprotected. Fungicides have to have good spray coverage. That is critical. Spray early. These things are good at preventing disease. They're not good at curing disease. If you think, oh, I'm going to go out and scout for disease, yeah, good luck with that. It's not going to work. When you see the disease, that disease has already been in your field probably for 2 or 3 weeks. You're, number 1, not going to stop it, and number 2, you've already lost a bunch of yield. You have to spray early. Okay? Diseases are usually more prevalent in wetter conditions, and even when it's humid, like in my state, we don't get a lot of rainfall in the summer. But the last few years, people want to talk about climate change. Okay, I'm not a believer in climate change, all right? But I will say this. Like in my state, like when my dad came from Iowa to South Dakota in 1969, there were no soybeans raised. There was corn, but it wasn't very good. And there was a lot of small grain. Well, small grain is more of a spring and very early summer crop, and then everything's dead. Well, now we have all this stuff growing, and all summer long, and it's amazing the crop that we raise anymore. And I want you to think about it. What does a crop do? It constantly puts moisture out, pulls moisture back in. Walk into any field in the summertime when stuff is nice and green and lush, it'll feel more humid in there, won't it? Okay, so that's what's happening. So we, to some degree, have changed things. And now in my state, in my area, in July, Baltic, South Dakota, right by Sioux Falls, we are actually more humid in July than Miami, Florida. Okay? It's unbelievable. So what has changed is I never used to have to spray for disease, and now I do. I don't have any more rainfall, but I got all this humidity there, and we have more disease and way higher yields. Here are just some other quick tips to get the most out of your fungicide. Spray in the morning, spray when it's cool, spray when the wind is calm, lower the pH of the water, 5 is better than 7, and then add a little bit of fulvic acid. That's a tip I picked up from some high yield guys years ago, and we've tested it a whole bunch. It really does work. Okay, world record wheat yield. My brother Darren and one of our head research guy, they went down to New Zealand to see Eric Watson. He had the world record yield for wheat until just the last couple of years now. I just thought this was super interesting, and I just wanted to throw this out. I just had a couple more wheat things. He only seeded 400,000 plants per acre, but he had 4 million tillers per acre. And he was real big on, so like when my brother got there, he's like, hey, I see you got a folder you're carrying with you. Set it on top of the wheat and just watch how it'll stand. And he goes, hey, take your cell phone now and try to your phone isn't quite big enough. But these big phones, he could literally get a phone to stand on top of his wheat. It was such a nice, thick, lush stand, but it was mostly tillers. It was just interesting. I'm not telling you that's how you have to raise wheat. I'm just saying it's interesting some of the ideas you get from around the world. Here's another thing. What happened to a lot of guys last year is they got really good yield, didn't have enough protein. Nitrogen is the whole key. If you have a year where your wheat is coming along really good and you go, wow, I think I'm going to have a great yield, add some more nitrogen. It's going to help your protein level. This is information right out of Canada here, just showing more nitrogen means more protein. And here's another thing I want you to think about. In this top right-hand corner, nitrogen. And what we're talking about on the bottom, that's the number of days in the growing season, and on the left, that's the percentage of nitrogen that crop will use. In the first couple of months, we're only using about 10% of the total nitrogen that plant needs. Look at what happens over 2-3 weeks, okay, kind of in the middle of the growing season. It uses half of its nitrogen. You have to have lots of nitrogen there and readily available. All right, last thing I got for you on wheat. Like on our farm, I like wide R match and Husky FX the best for herbicides. And I would say this, I find most farmers that I work with on wheat, they're not thinking about bugs. But every time when I go out with a sweep net, or even I'll just take a baseball cap and whip back and forth, I'm finding harmful bugs in wheat all the time. Insecticides are really inexpensive. If you got harmful bugs, kill them. Okay, some of the guys that I surveyed, they said, hey, we're raising some oats. What do you suggest for oats? What I do in the United States, we raise oats every year. I put down Callisto and Sharpen, and I'm done. I put those two things out there pre-emerge. My weeds are pretty well dead. I got a nice thick stand. The biggest thing that I would say is this. If you want to raise great oats, you got to have it stand. So you got to have lots of potassium if you don't want lodging issues. And then the other thing, we use Palisade, growth regulator to shorten the crop. So that's what we're doing, and we're able to raise pretty amazing oats. Okay, I don't have time to go through every last detail of these next few slides, but I wanted to show you, I got soybeans and I got corn coming up here, what we do on our farm. And I'll just tell you this. So we've tried a lot of things out over the years. And by the way, I've been talking about my family a little bit. So it's my brother and me. Our sister is still around. She doesn't manage any of the farm. She just does some stuff for us with radio and some of the media things we do. But anyway, so it's up to my brother and me, and usually I'm the one making a lot of the decisions for our farm. But if Darren and I ever disagree on something, I'll just say this, because people ask me all the time, man, you work with your brother all the time. And I tell them, look, I've had to do a TV show every single week for 27 years with my brother, so oh yeah, we're working together all the time. They go, how do you get along? And I said, we figured this out years ago. When we disagree on something, you know what we do? We say, all right, let's settle it in the field. I don't care. We'll try his idea. We'll try my idea, even though I think my idea is going to be right 100% of the time. We're going to try them both. Seriously. And I want you to think about one other thing too, because for all of us, we're proud. But I tell people this all the time. I say, guys, you know what? When we do these prove it things in the field, and we do, there's something every year. I'd rather be wrong. And you might say, what? Why would you rather be wrong? Don't you want to rub it in your brother's face if, oh, I'm right and I told you? I go, no, because I want you to think about this for just a second. Let's say I was farming by myself. Let's say it was all Brian all the time. Well, then I'm not getting his idea. I would just continue on with the wrong idea and not make as much money. So I don't care what position you're at in your farm, son, daughter, grandpa, grandma, person in charge, person not in charge. I just want you to be open to some ideas. Just try it on a small scale, but prove it out. And I'm dead serious. I would rather be wrong, because now I found something that's going to make me more money. My point is, I would rather make more money than be right. Okay, so as far as what we do on our farm, with our own land, what did we start talking about today? Drain tile. Next thing, fixing soil nutrients. Those are the two most important things on the farm. When I talk to guys, it's usually about varieties or how do I kill this weed or whatever. The two most important things you can do are fix the drainage and build up your soil fertility. Both of those things, in my opinion, long-term investments. I look at it when I buy the ground, whatever I have to pay, I just add on what's my cost for tile, and I add on what's my cost to fix every nutrient issue I got in the field. And I say, all right, this is my total cost for that land. Continuing on there. Soybeans are not a scavenger crop. Soybeans have 1/5 the root mass of corn. They have a small root system. We've got to make sure that we're feeding them. We have to have good overall soil fertility. We like planting early. We plant several varieties, and we vary the population. Any crop we're raising, we vary the population. Okay, here again, it's not about spending more money. It's about spending it in the right spots. Just some other things that we do. I'm not a real huge fan of putting much fertilizer in furrow. You got to be really careful. Soybeans are super sensitive. We do some insecticide and some biologicals, though. Other things that we do, we spray really early. This is something I was talking to some guys about yesterday. We actually spray a fair amount of our pre-emerge herbicides in the fall. And they go, fall, aren't you worried about losing it? I go, how am I going to lose it? The ground's frozen after that. It's not going anywhere. It works great. Then I go along in the spring. My pre-emerge herbicides are already done. And now all I have to do is plant. I can focus on planting and everything else I got to do. So anyway, that works great. Here's another thing, post-emerge. Always spray the weediest fields when you have the best spraying conditions. All right, just some other things that I'll tell you. A week before flowering, we start on our sclerotinia white mold program. In soybeans, we can use Cobra. That's really cheap. It costs for us $4 an acre, and it's almost as good as the very best sclerotinia white mold fungicides like Endura, for example. Okay, other things that we're taking a look at. We do spray fungicide every single year. It's usually around that R2, full flower to first pod kind of timing. I tell guys, hey, if you got soybeans, when you see the first pod in the field, I'd be spraying a fungicide. If I got a white mold spot just in the white mold areas, the traditional white mold areas, that's where I'm doing other things. All right, I got to keep moving here. Iron deficiency chlorosis. If you have that, here's what's going on. I don't care what crop it is. At soil pH levels above 7, your good ferrous iron turns to ferric iron, and that's not available for the plant. Now, you might do soil tests and you see, oh, I have iron in the soil. You can do plant tissue analysis and you see, yeah, I do have iron in that plant tissue, but it's not the right form. We got to try to get that iron into the ferrous form. So long term, I'd like to see you try to get that soil pH down, improve drainage, lower nitrate, salts, bicarbonates, all those things will work. Otherwise, in the short term, you can pick tolerant varieties. I don't have one today, but for a little while we had a drill where I could plant 2 different varieties in the same field, and we would switch as we would go in an IDC spot. Now, we've fixed all our IDC areas now, but this worked great. I'd plant the IDC variety in the IDC area and the racehorse variety everywhere else. Otherwise, you can use an EDDHA iron. That works. Don't spray it foliar, though. You can green up the plant, but where you get the yield gain is you got to use it at planting time. Don't do it later. Also, increase planting population. It's another little trick. If you have iron deficiency chlorosis in any crop, I don't care what it is, bump your population in your bad IDC spots, because your plants then, you'll have more plants to kick more acid into the soil, and at least temporarily, that will get your iron back to the ferrous form. That works, okay? That's a big deal. And then just remove any other stresses. All right, here's our preferred corn program on our farm. It's going to look kind of similar to our soybean program, but let me share one little thing with you, and this is a tip I got when I was a young agronomist like 35 years ago from some really big farmers that were super successful. They said, because we were figuring out on all their acres and how much herbicide they needed, and their number was higher than mine. And I go, how are you guys coming up with a higher number than what I got? And they go, well, Brian, we're going to go around the border of every single field we've got, and we're going to put on a double rate. And I go, well, you know that you're not legally supposed to do that, right? And they're like, yeah, we don't care. We're doing it. We don't have time to come back. But they said, Brian, think about where the big weed issues are. I'm like, yeah, you're right. It is around the field borders. I said, that is a really good idea, guys. I can't do that because that's not illegal. But what we started doing that very next year is when our crop is small, and I don't care what crop it is, any crop, we go around the field borders just with the outside boom of the sprayer on, and we kill the weeds and bugs. We spray bugs on the outside because that's usually where our bug issues come from, is the outside of our field. So we do this. It doesn't take very long, just a couple days, and our guys can zip around to all the fields, spray the borders of every field. It's made a big difference for us. And you might think, wow, it's not that many acres, whatever else. Two things. Number one, it is quite a few acres when you add it up, and it does make a difference. Why would you not do something that makes good money? Number two is this. What does everybody see when they drive past your field? Do they see out in the middle of the field where the crop is great? Nope. They see the field border. Now, if you're trying to rent more ground, you want every landlord out there to think, well, that's the best farmer in the province, right? Or if it's just you want bragging rights with your neighbors, you're like, yeah, take a look at my crop. It's amazing. Make the outside of your field look great. So anyway, I got more stuff there on corn. These are just some of the things that we do on our farm. All right. Also, I get a lot of questions about biologicals and naturals. These are the things that we're using in our operation. Heat shield, we're using these fungal endophytes. By the way, that guy that set the world record on wheat yield, he also uses fungal endophytes. What they are, it's a fungus that lives inside the plant. And you're like, ooh, this is sounding kind of weird, kind of fishy. Like, really? Is that? No, that legitimately does work. Okay, where they discover, so a couple of these fungal endophytes that we use in this heat shield product, they discovered in Yellowstone National Park around the geysers where the soil temp is like 130 to 150 degrees, where plants don't normally grow, and they found plants living. And what they found is, it wasn't the genetics, it wasn't anything else, it was a fungus inside the plant. I know it sounds weird, but these kind of things are getting used around the world now. Okay, other things that we're doing, Nutricycle, that helps solubilize more nutrients. Megagrow, it's plant growth hormones, and we get bigger root mass. Nutex CDA, it's zinc plus some fulvic acid. We like that on top of the crop with fungicide or foliar fertilizer, works great. Reverb, humic acid. We use that on what I would call junky ground. Use it on the soil or to help stabilize your nitrogen. That's where we like humic acid. We use some amino acids, then some other plant growth hormones to help flowering. Okay, I got just a few last things here for you. But before I get to anything else, I just want to say, don't kill your microbes. So I don't know how many companies are here at Manitoba Ag Days trying to sell you a biological product. I will just say there are quite a few products that actually can work, but you know what we commonly see? And I made the mistake myself on our own farm. I killed some of our biologicals. I wasn't even thinking about it. Here are some of the things that can kill these biologicals. Zinc. Ammoniated zinc is terrible. Zinc citrate. If you put a biological into these products, your biologicals are dead within an hour. Okay? Copper. Copper is really bad for microbes. Chlorine, that'll kill it almost instantly. If you have chlorinated water, there's a product we use, it's called BioPrep, costs about 5 cents an acre, turns the chlorine into chloride. Chloride is a plant nutrient, and now we don't kill the biological. And then we want to have calcium, magnesium, and iron at decent levels. We use some water treatment stuff there too. All right, last couple things that I got for you. Your good buddy Trump is now in office. Now, I get it. He's going to say a bunch of nonsense. He's always done that. But I do want to share just a couple of things with you, because some of these farmers that I had surveyed, they said, Brian, you got to talk about Trump and the tariffs for just a minute. And I'm like, all right, let me just put it this way. In the United States, first of all, we love Canada. I love coming to Canada. By the way, my wife was mad because I'm not coming home for a couple days and I can't bring her Tim Hortons donuts. But anyway, Look at our U.S. trade deficit with Canada is only $41 billion in 23, 54, and 22. Look at the U.S. trade deficit with China, 8 times as much. Who do you think Trump really cares about? China. Okay, that's who he's actually really going after. So he's going to throw every threat out in the world, but all he's after is just a fair deal. He's really trying to work on the Chinese thing. The other thing that's kind of interesting when you look at politics, first of all, how did Trump win the election? So Trump red, Harris, the Democrat candidate, in blue. Look at where rural America is, red. Okay, all voted for Trump. Why did farmers vote for Trump? Farmers are looking for lower taxes, less regulation, more grain exports, secure border, less crime, lower energy costs, lower inflation, lower interest rates. I don't think those are anything unreasonable to ask for, but that's the reason why farmers voted for Trump. So, yeah, I apologize that we have a leader who will say all kinds of random weird things, but I guess we got who we got. Just like for you guys, sometimes you go, well, you got who you got, okay? But anyway, I am excited for the future. I think farming is going to be a lot of fun as we move forward. However, there are a lot of non-farmers out there that think for some reason we're doing bad stuff out here in the country. So I do get a charge out of why are people so opposed to chemicals when every day they're using chemicals around their house, like household cleaners, shampoo, soap, perfume, toothpaste, baking powder, alcohol, aspirin, sunscreen, mouthwash. I had a lady come up to me last month after I was giving a talk like this, and she goes, Brian, do you know that the average woman in the United States puts 160 chemicals on or in her body every single day? 160! And we're going to complain about ag chemicals that are now quite safe? I was telling some guys yesterday, I told you a little bit ago, when I was in college and right after college, I worked for FMC. They had this product called Furidan. Now, for those of you who are young and don't remember Furidan, oh, it was potent stuff. I remember my very first day, and I asked people there, I'm like, isn't this stuff kind of dangerous? And they go, well, look, Brian, as long as you live through the day, you're fine. It doesn't build up in your system. Now, making it through the day, And I would go around and I would talk to aerial applicators about Furidan a little bit, but there were some aerial applicators that didn't want to use Furidan because they liked parathion. Here again, if you're too young to remember parathion, let me just talk to you about this. The aerial applicators said, yeah, with parathion, we know that if our plane goes down and we lived, there's no point in going to the hospital, we're dead, the parathion will kill us. And they said, we love parathion because when we spray it over the field, it kills everything. Oh, they didn't just mean the bugs. They meant the raccoons, the pheasants, the deer, the people, if they're out there. Everything's dead with parathion. My point is, these are the things we used to have in agriculture. They're gone. They're gone. What do we have now? We have stuff like the pyrethroids, most popular insecticide family in the world. That comes from a flower. Callisto and the HPPDs, they come from a tree. Headline, that comes from wood-rotting fungi. It's a lot of natural stuff now. A quick story I'll tell you. I was in Arizona a few years ago, and I went to this large farm. I wanted a tour of his farm. He did a lot of organic stuff and a lot of conventional farming. And I said, yeah, just tell me about the differences and everything. He said, Brian, here's the thing. To produce organic, it costs me 50% more, and my yield is 10 to 20% less. There are a lot of people in your country, just like in my country, that say, we need to ban all fertilizer and pesticides. Okay, look, I'm here to help you farm however you want to farm. But let me give you this example real quick. There's a little island country south of India. It's called Sri Lanka. Back in 2021, they decided, we're going to ban all fertilizer and pesticides. You know what happened? Within a year, their food prices were double. 38% of the people were short on food. 2.3 million kids out of only 6.2 million were starving, and it didn't take very long, and they overthrew the government. You can't do dumb stuff like that. We can't ban fertilizer and pesticides. That's nonsense. There's nothing wrong with the fertilizer and the pesticides that we're using, and I could give you all kinds of information on that. But here's the other thing that I want you to think about. There are a lot of rich people that set a lot of rules for all of us. If they ban fertilizer and pesticides and food prices double, does that hurt the rich people? Nope. Who's it hurt? The poor people. Okay? What we do every day as farmers, as agronomists, it is important stuff. We're here to feed the world. And I think we're doing a fantastic job. Don't let anybody tell you any different. Here's a little more information from us. If you want to see our TV show, I told you earlier, you can stream that on Acres TV. It's a free streaming channel, okay? Free. Doesn't cost anything, and you can watch a whole bunch of great ag TV shows. If you're interested in any of our events, I've got one here on Friday. I'm going to be down in Fargo. We do live stream some of our stuff too. You can just check that out on agphd.com. I'd really like to have you come down to our Ag PhD Field Day. It's always the last Thursday in July. There's a picture from one of our most recent field days. It's right on our farm. And it's a free event. We don't charge you for anything. We just put it on every year to say thanks to you for watching us on TV and radio. There's where you can catch us on radio, TV. There's our contact information. But before I go, I got to leave you with my two favorite Bible verses. My first one comes out of Philippians. It says, "Don't worry about anything as long as farm income is high." Now, you laugh, but when crop prices go down, all of a sudden, are you worrying? Okay, that's not what it tells you to do in the Bible. Instead, it tells you to do this. Be joyful always. I want to thank you a lot for your time. I want to thank the people here at Manitoba Ag Days for having me out. Be joyful always. Have a great year. I certainly hope everything turns out great for you this year. And if there's ever anything we can do to help, just get a hold of us. Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it. Hope to see you all again soon. Thank you.